Welcome back to Crossbeats Production, and this is Nate28. This tutorial is more of a quick how-to on how I mastered this track and what I did to master the track. Now, there's a lot of different things that are involved in mastering, and I don't want to get into all of those right now in this tutorial, but I do want to give you guys an example of what the before and after sounds like of a track that I've just mastered, and kind of the things that you aim for when you're mastering a track. This particular track is a hip-hop rap kind of style track, and I'm just going to quickly find the artist's name because I just got this submitted to me today. Gravity 96. So whoa, hang on, let me just make sure there's nothing there. Okay, yeah, so pretty much it's submitted to me by the label group Iconic. Well, it's actually under the label group of Down Under label group, which is part of the Australian Iconic label group as well. I work together with them, and they're a Christian label group that submits rap all over the world, and they've got different artists on their roster there. So I work with one of the great label managers there, and him and I kind of work together a lot. So anyway, if you want to check this song out, I'm sure at some point it's going to be released on the label itself, and it'll probably be on their YouTube page at some point. Maybe just hit me up in the comments if you want to check it out. But anyway, I'll just give you a quick taste of the song. I'm sure the artist probably won't mind me advertising in a bit, so I'll just give you a quick taste of the song, and then you can check it out. And I'll just show you behind the scenes of what I did to master this track and how I got it to sound so loud and clear and upfront. And then you can listen to it from there. So let's go with the track.
Hey, my name stick. Got my eyes on him, on the 10 I want to get ace. Covered in the blood, reason that I'm here today. No way I'm going to change, no way I'm going to say hello to my olden days. They call me S.T.I. CKA, man at the moment I'm going in straight like I miss those curves. And I'm just this guy, Mr. Evangelist, whose purpose is serving God as a gift, no envelope. And I'm really about...
Alright, so that's a brief kind of listen to the track, and I turned down the volume of the actual track because I wanted to give you guys a comparison of what the two pre-master and master track sounds like. I think I turned it down by about 3.5 3.2 dB, and that's kind of similar to the volume of the unmastered track. So it's not, I don't want to deceive your ears and make you think that just because of the volume that the track's actually sounding better, because if you do turn things up in volume, they do definitely sound better, and that's probably part of mastering anyway. But this original track, let me just play this part for you so you can hear it. So I'll just flick between the two, and then you can hear the difference between.
Got my eyes on him, on the 10 I want to get ace. Covered in the blood, reason that I'm here today. No way I'm going to change, no way I'm going to say hello to my olden days.
So what you're going to look for is the dynamic range on this. You can see a lot of movement within the track, and there's less movement within this track. It's got -3 dB, and it pretty much sticks to that most of the time, but the dynamic range on the unmastered track is a lot more. It kind of varies from about minus, I don't know, I think minus, let me just check. Yeah, so -9 to about -3. So when you're mastering a track, as you can see, the volume of this track here, the second one in the purple, the volume or the dynamic range has decreased quite a bit, and I'll just expand that a bit so you can see. So the dynamic range throughout the track, the transients, as you can see, the transients have been squashed down to more accurate levels with the rest of the track itself. So that's one thing that happens in mastering, especially when you limit a track and you maximize the volume of it as much as you can. I pretty much maximize this volume, and I'll show you how I did it and what I did to do it, and the techniques that I use to increase or maximize volume within the track without damaging the transient too much. Because I guess the key to mastering, and anybody will probably agree on this, in the sense of when you're using, especially with maximizer limiters, you don't want to crush the transient where it sounds distorted, and you don't have that I guess the kick of the drums and response of, the snap of the snare or whatever it might be. there is certainly some ways you can restore some of those transients, and I've done a little bit of that with the transient emphasis here in Ozone. Now, Ozone 6, Ozone 5, Ozone 7, whichever one that you decide to use if you're using Ozone, I'm believing there's probably 4 or 3 before that. I don't know. I haven't used those ones, but I used 5 a lot, and now I use 6, and I haven't really moved on to 7 because I just didn't want to fork out the cash for it at this point. But the things that I try to do, especially with my mastering, is first off, I'll put on the limiter maximizer kind of at the start, but I don't crank the volume on that at the start. I just leave the volume right up here somewhere, just at maybe minus 1, I think minus 1.5 or something like that. Usually I'll do that because when I'm trying to listen to the transients of the track, especially when I'm using dynamic control, for example, a compressor like this multiband compressor is pretty handy, especially to get some of the different characteristics of the track out. But when I'm using compression or EQ or even the exciter, I don't tend to want to compress or maximize the volume at that point. I'll usually leave that till right at the end, and then I'll start to increase the volume and maximize that, and really push the track as far as I can without destroying it. There's a couple of different features within this. It's got IRC 1, 2, and 3, which just is different characteristics with the release times. I think on the way that it's not just the release times, but there are other things behind the scenes, especially I believe with IRC 3. It has, from what I'm aware, some kind of multi-band maximization, but it's not something you can see on the physical site of this plugin. There are other maximizers that have multi-band limitation or limiter, and maximizers that increase the volumes in a multi-band fashion, where I'll just quickly show you one. I've done this before. I'm pretty sure I've shown it before in another one of my tutorials, but DMG Audio makes Limitless, which is pretty fantastic. I haven't actually bought this, but I've used it and demoed it. It's got different multi-band limitations there. So it uses a limiter in multi-band fashion like a compressor would in this multi-band compressor that I was showing you before. So similar kind of structure. I don't want to talk too much about compression and all that sort of stuff. I just want to give you guys a quick overview of how I first attacked this track. So when I got the track, first off, I listened to it and I briefly make notes mentally in my mind what I like about the track, what I want the track to sound like, or what I think the artist wants the track to sound like, more like it, not what I want it to sound like. But I try and take down the notes and think about how they would want it to sound, and I try and compare it in my mind to other tracks out on the market or other music that's similar to it, so that when I finally finish with the mastering, that I hope that it's like what they had envisioned in the start with their track. So the first thing I did was, like I said, listen to the track, checked out the dynamic range. As you saw in the first demo there I gave you, it had a fair decent amount of dynamic range. It wasn't clipping, which is fantastic. That's one crucial thing, especially when you're submitting your tracks to a mastering engineer. You don't want your tracks to be clipping already, because if they are, it's going to really stuff up the mastering in the end. Because the most I think the hardest thing to deal with, especially if you have a track that's clipping, is the distortion that's created when it starts to clip. And if that distortion is in the track already, it is pretty much almost... There are ways to get it out with some things like RX Repair, which is made by Isotope, but I haven't used that a whole lot. But I know you can get certain things out of tracks and you can repair them, but it's just really difficult, and it makes your job a whole lot harder when you're trying to master a track. And especially when you're pushing it to the max with the maximizer limiter or things like that. But anyway, you try and leave some headroom. That's one crucial thing. Second thing is really get your levels right on the mix. Don't submit a track that's not 100% right and how you want it to sound, because the mastering engineer isn't there to correct EQ techniques you should have made when you were doing the mixing, or compression techniques that you should have made. They're there to be pretty much invisible. I would say not completely invisible, but almost invisible, like they never really were there, but they've made the track sound how it should sound to the radio market or wherever that track's ending up. So enough babble. I will show you how I created this mastering, and I'll give you an example of how I did it. So first off, what I did was I put this compressor on here. This compressor I really, really like. It's a Neve compressor. It's pretty much supposed to emulate the original Neve compressor, but this is one of the two that you get with the UAD one that when you buy it. If you don't have this compressor, don't be alarmed, because it's not the be-all and end-all of mastering. It's just something that I like to use, and I like the sound of it. I like the analog kind of feel that it gives, and I definitely went for this one when I first started. So I'll show you what it sounds like with this compressor on and off, and just give you an indication of what it did to the track. So let me just put this on here, and let's get started with that.
Got my eyes on him, on the 10 I want to get ace. Covered in the blood, reason that I'm here today. No way I'm going to change, no way I'm going to say hello to my olden days. They call me STI, CKA. Man, at the moment I'm going in straight like I miss those curves, and I'm just this guy.
Alright, so if you listen to the track, then you would hear a slight difference in the track. I don't know so much about the volume increase, because there wasn't a whole lot of volume increase, maybe a slight amount, but not a whole lot, and I'm not going to go level matching at this point. But what I noticed, especially with the compression, is the needle is barely moving, and with compression on a mastering track or a 2-bus, you don't really want to compress a whole lot. There are sometimes ways or reasons or rhymes why you would do that, but at this point on this particular track, that's not what I'm looking to do, because I don't want to crush the transients that are in there. I just really want to bring everything together and smooth and cohesive, I guess, to make sense, if what I'm trying to say is making sense. That's the first compressor that I put on there, and I didn't engage the limiter, and I left that all alone. I've just got an auto release on here, and minimal makeup gain and minimal compression, and I'm using the 4:1 ratio, which just in my opinion sounded good at the time. I flicked through a couple of the ratios, which was 1:5, which I thought sounded good at the start, but then when I got to 4:1, it just really glued everything together, and that's exactly what I was chasing. So that's the first compressor that I put on, right? So I'll just move that up there. Actually, let's move that here. So first compressor. And then the second compressor that I put, this is like probably one of my most favorite compressors ever at this stage, and it was pretty cheap. I'm pretty sure it cost me $39 or something like that, $39. I can't exactly remember, but I really love this compressor because it just, for some reason, works on so many different things, and you can get so much out of it, and it's just, I don't know, it's great. Anyway, so this is the second compressor. I'll just compare with and without, and I'll play from the same point.
Got my eyes on him, on the 10 I want to get ace. Covered in the blood, reason that I'm here today. No way I'm going to change, no way I'm going to say hello to my olden days. They call me STI, CKA. Man, at the moment I'm going in straight like I miss those curves, and I'm just this guy.
Okay, so you won't notice anything really much with that compressor, except for maybe the transients sound a little bit different, but there's not a whole lot going on with that compressor. It just gives that extra little bit of glue and just that sound that that compressor has that I know and I'm familiar with. But if you're not used to hearing that compressor, you probably won't know a whole lot about what that sound sounds like. But the more and more you use compressors, the more and more you listen to them, the more you focus on what that compressor or that individual EQ is doing, then you'll start to learn how they sound. And to be honest, I think in time everybody can learn these things, and some people just think that, you know, I can't hear the difference and I can't understand what's going on, but you do. If you really start to focus on what is happening, just close your mind off to anything else and don't think about what the song sounds like. Just think about when you switch that switch, maybe you close your eyes even, just close your eyes and turn the compressor on and off and see if you can hear a difference, because if you do that, you'll start to teach your brain and teach your ears how the certain sounds are affecting different things. And that's what I guess I did in the learning phase of when I started learning this stuff. But anyway, that's just the next compressor that I put on there, so you can see that. Final compressor I put on here, apart from the multiband compressor, was the fancy SSL from UAD again. This is one that I purchased probably a little while ago, and it's something that I don't know why, I just seem to always love the SSL bus compressor. It's the SSL-G, which is from the G series channel, and it just seems to work on different material quite well most of the time. Sometimes I don't use it, but anyway, let me just put it on and off and you can hear the difference.
Got my eyes on him, all the 10 I want to get is covered in the blood, reason that I'm here today. No way I'm going to change, no way I'm going to sit low to my olden days. They call me STI, CKA, man at the moment I'm going straight like I missed those curves.
Okay, slight volume increase, and that's almost on purpose, but I have a minimal compression, the needle's barely moving, and I'll zoom in on that so you can see it in a second. But actually I probably already did zoom in on it. So the needle's hardly moving, and I do increase volume. I usually use the auto release on this because it's really good. 2-to-1 ratio, you can go 4-to-1 if you want, but 2-to-1 worked well for this because I had already used 2 other compressors prior to this compressor. So that's what that did. So basically, if you just think of the first thing you want to do is kind of determine how your mix sounds when you receive it. If there's a lot of high end or a lot of things that are going to affect the compressor, especially with the low end, you want to get that tamed, and you might want to use a multiband compressor to do that. But in this case, I really thought the song sounded great, how it was mixed, and I didn't need to go in there and start taming all that sort of stuff too much, at least anyway. So with that compressor, you know, it comes down to, people ask EQ, compression, which one goes first, and there's really no right and wrong answer to that. It's creative ability, I guess, that you choose which one you want to put before the other. There is a great tutorial that I remember watching about that actual fact, compression before EQ or EQ before compression. The difference is, I guess, the main thing that you'll get is distortion. So distortion happens especially with the compressor if it's being overdriven, or you're getting a lot of movement out of the needle, for that example of overdriving the compressor. You do get distortion even if it's not completely being overdriven. To a degree you get distortion anyway, but I guess you really want to focus on the fact that what the EQ is doing prior to the compressor or what it's doing after, and how you're trying to be creative with that EQ, for example. But that's more of a mixing technique. This is for mastering at this stage. I just want to give you an idea of how a compressor could work before an EQ, or it could work after the EQ. But at this particular situation, I just used it, and I didn't require EQ at that stage. Alright, so that's the 3 compressors that I used, and I'll just line them up so you can just briefly see them all together. So that is that. Now, not in any order anyway, but this is the 3 orders that I used. I don't know if that's anything specific, but so let's get to what I did in Ozone 6. So Ozone 6, I first off got my EQ, and I got my bus compressor for the multiband compressor there, and I usually try and get somewhat decent level and decide the ratios that I want to use, and sometimes it depends on what's happening with low end, what's happening with the high end, all that sort of stuff, as to what attack settings you'll choose and release settings you'll choose. And also the fancy thing about this is you can use parallel, which is really great in my opinion. You sometimes just want to have parallel compression even in a multiband compressor, but I link and unlink this sometimes depending on what I need to do. But normally what I'll do is get all of these kind of level, and then I'll start to drag them down, listening to the track itself. I'm not going to turn it on now because I've already done it on this original track, and if I do it without actually I can't really do it for the video, but just for an example anyway, I'll just turn the volume up on the, actually give me a second. So I'll put this track on and I'll just leave this off. So
got my eyes on him, all the 10 I want to get is covered in the blood, reason that.
Let me just briefly turn this on, and I'll just give you an example. I'll just turn these off for now.
Got my eyes on him. On the 10 I want to get ace.
Focus down the bottom here at this line here. You can see how much it's actually decreasing in volume.
Got my eyes on him. On the 10 I want to get ace. Covered in the blood.
Alright, great. So pretty much not a whole lot of compression going on. The most compressed part is the mid-range side of it. And I'm using an attack setting of 17 milliseconds and a release setting of 20. So quite fast attacks. Not hugely fast attack, but not that slow either. So a real fast release for the sake of releasing it decently quickly. And I mean, you could do a faster release, but in my opinion, the transients were just perfectly releasing and perfectly being attacked with that two settings there. The ratio was obviously, the most ratio I used was on the low end frequencies, and that was for a reason, to control them. The next frequency ratio, so the next ratio I used was 2:1 for all of these other frequency bands, except for the final one here, which was going from below 160 to 20 hertz. Next thing was the adaptive release, which I left on because it was just working well. You don't have to leave that on, but I just did for that sake. And also the automatic gain compensation, so it caused the automatic gain increase of the volume of my track. So you'll notice here there's a little bit of clipping, and that's because it was just using the compressor and I didn't have the maximizer on there. But at this point I was kind of getting close to maybe 0 dB, just over that, just for these compression alone. So that's kind of why I left this this multiband on at this point. So let me turn the multiband on. You might want to turn your speakers down just for a second so I can just give you an example of what all of this sounds like, and then I'll just quickly explain it so I can finish this video up, and you guys can ask me any questions in the comments that you want. So let's just play it. Turn your volume down just now.
Got my eyes on him. On the 10 I want to get ace. Covered in the blood, reason that I'm here today. No way I'm going to change. No way I'm going to say hello to my olden days. They call me STI, CKA. Man, at the moment I'm going in straight like I miss those curves. And I'm just this guy, Mr. Evangelist, whose purpose is serving.
Okay, so key things here, right? We've got maximizer, which I am pretty much limiting the absolute out of it. So I'm getting a little bit of distortion, I guess, from here. You could turn that down if you want to stop that distortion, but it didn't really bother me too much, so I just left it. It wasn't really too much of an issue. But the maximization, so as you can see here, I might just see if I can put the hold on this a little bit longer. Peak hold. There we go. Whoop. Okay, so let's just quickly. Alright, so peak hold. So alright, so we're getting about -8 in the mono in RMS, and the stereo's minus 10, I would guess, -3. See if I can zoom out a bit. Yeah, so okay, so close to -8 in RMS. I wouldn't recommend pushing it too much more than that. You can get about -6 if you want to get it really loud, but you're just losing all your dynamic range about somewhere around there anyway. So looking at RMS, kind of, you just want to stick around somewhere about -10 if you really want to have some dynamicness to your song. If you want to have dynamic range to your song, stay with about -12, -10, somewhere like that. Depending on the song, you can push it even louder. Especially with EDM or rap or hip hop like this, you can just push it as far as you want, really, without it distorting. That's pretty much what I did on this track. But it's not a rule of thumb, and there are definitely loudness regulations. It depends on where you're taking this track, so just be wary of that, and be mindful of different things. Like TV, for example, has a loudness regulation in the US, but at this point I'm just mastering this track to get as much loudness as possible. So I used IRC3. It sounded really good in my opinion, gave an openness to the track, and it really just created that that sound that I was looking for. Next thing was the character on the track. I pulled that down to a real quick release time, so the transients weren't too affected and the release wasn't destroying my transient of the kick and the snare and all that stuff with the low end. Stereo unlink, I didn't use that at all because I wanted it to be linked as much as I could. It didn't sound right when it was really unlinked. I didn't fiddle around with that too much, to be honest. Anyway, transient emphasis, I created 7.8 with that on. Without it, didn't sound bad, but it definitely gave a little bit more kick to the actual kick in the snare when I put it on. So that worked out well. Next thing was EQ. I like to use mid-side EQ rather than just stereo, because stereo isn't as... you can't be as intricate with stereo, I feel, at least on tracks like this of mastering. I like to be able to control my mid-range, like the mono signal, and I like to be able to control the stereo. So what I did was, obviously I gave it a bit of a boost, 1.6 at the low end frequencies at 42, gave that 808, that real thick boomy sound that you want with a sub, if you listen to a car or wherever you're listening. And I gave a reduction at sort of the mid frequencies, only real small amounts of reduction, and kind of a narrow Q. Another reduction here at 257, just sounded real good at that. That's actually not on, so I'll just turn that. Yeah, it's not. I'll turn it off. And a reduction here at really small amounts too. Like, it doesn't have to be a lot, because if you start to listen to things and you start to reduce bus EQ, you're going to start to notice things are missing and things are disappearing in your mix, and you don't want that to happen. You really just want to focus on the problem EQs. So you can use a Q by using Option Alt. That creates this little Q here, and you can listen to the real problem frequencies by moving this around like that. And while your track's running, just listening to the things that really stick out and don't sound good to you, and then you just reduce them. It's pretty simple like that. There's this great EQ plugin which is made by Isotope, and it's called Neutron. That's something I really, really love, and if you have that plugin or you want to demo that, I've made another tutorial on that plugin, and I'll probably end up buying that maybe this week, because I just like that plugin so much. But anyway, it's got this fantastic thing that you can use the automatic feature on there, that it starts to move the EQ around to automatically give you points of EQ to reduce or increase, or whatever the frequency is needing at that point. But anyway, I just wanted to give you an idea. So this is the reductive EQ that I'm using. I tend to use a lot of reductive EQ on mastering, not a whole lot of increasing the EQ, but the only time where I did that was right at the top end frequencies, and I gave it 2.1, and I don't know if it needs that completely, but I'll find out when I listen to this on another set of speakers, because it might not need that. But it just gave that real clarity. The top end frequencies, really high end frequencies that give that air and the airy kind of sound. So around about 10,000 hertz, I reduced at 1.1, sort of narrow band EQ, and that was because it was giving that real hissy sound that I don't like, and I want to be able to crank this without hurting my ears too much. So next thing was side frequencies, which are the stereo sides, so both left and right. These are interesting EQ moves. So what I did here was I used two different shelf EQs. So the first one I did was increase in volume at 2.3, and that was at 9, all the way up to almost mid-range frequencies. This is a bizarre type of thing to do, but if you're thinking about it, there's no rule in any of this, right? So you could think this is crazy the way I did this, but it actually worked out really well. And the reason why it did was because I reduced some of the lower end frequencies as well. So I wasn't just increasing it so I could get that real weird sound going on, but I increased some of the mid frequencies within the stereo spectrum. Because I just felt like it really gave the song some width and fullness, and that's how it worked out. So it worked out really well. Now, the next thing I did was I moved across to here, and using the same feature again. Obviously, I just got to this frequency and didn't like it, and I usually listen just in the stereo spectrum on this particular move that I do with the EQ. So I'll listen just stereo or just mono, and I'll make those adjustments within those type of things there, and then I'll go back to both stereo and mono together, and I'll listen to it, and if it sounds right or it sounds wrong, then I'll go back and adjust things, or I might leave it in stereo and just try and adjust it throughout that spectrum. But I tend to like to listen to them individually, because then I can really focus on the problem frequencies there. So that's reductive EQ, and that was at 2.4. It just really gave some clarity to the mid-range, or not mid, the mid-range, gave clarity to the mid-range in the middle frequencies. So I could clear out some of that stuff that was really irritating me at the stereo field and give it to the mono. Real minor EQ reduction at 0.4 at 5,000 hertz, and a small shelf at 10, just to get rid of some of that real high-end stuff. Now, I moved this in at the last point. Some people like to put it in first, and I don't choose whether or not I put it in first or last. It's just how it ended up coming. And I wanted to give the track a little bit of that, I guess, tape analog-y kind of sound. So for some reason I forgot about this until right at the end, and I was like, oh man, I need to put some stuff into this because it just needs that extra oomph. So oversampling, I used oversampling on this just to give that oversampling, obviously. So then I put it on a few different of these modes. I put it on dual triad, and then at the tape, and very minimal amounts of it as well. So this is a mix of what is the mix? It's close to about 35%, and then another mix of 23%, 22%, and 50%. This mix here, I might bring it down later on, but I had to really be careful, especially when I maximize the track, because, you know, when you've got top end stuff, you can really start to hear the distortion in the track, and especially with this artificial tape plugin kind of thing, it does create distortion quite easily, and it can quite easily destroy your track. So you got to be careful with these type of plugins, especially with the tape or anything that's like this that creates artificial distortion, because it might mess your track up a bit. So they're pretty much the things that I've put in this. The final thing was to get the low end frequencies. First off, that looks pretty cool. The low end frequencies focused in the middle. So as you can see, no, you can't see it. Why can't you see it? Oh well, whatever. It's bugging out. So yeah, so pretty much the low end frequencies, you really want to focus that in. I think I know why I can't, because it's in stereo. What a dummy. There you go, so it works. So low end frequencies. So I really wanted those in mono, and the next part of the frequency spectrum, obviously I dragged that all the way down so it was in mono, and that's at 94 kilohertz, so most of the low end frequencies, so it's not going to affect phase issues and all that sort of stuff. Then I kind of fiddled around with this for a bit, and I noticed that the wider that I brought it, the kind of more, it sounded cool in the studio where I am right now, but I don't think it would really sound that good when it's in other speaker setups. So I left. So as you can see, the mid-range frequencies, I tried to keep them as in phase as possible, so I pulled that down just a little bit, minus 3.8, and then I dragged this up this tiny little section here, but it just gave this the hi-hats a real wide sound, and it created this nice stereo sound that I wanted. So anyway, so I did that, and it kind of worked out really well. And it's got this learn feature here, so if you click on that while you're playing the track, it will learn to where you can put stuff. I actually moved this around from where it told me to put it, and it actually sounded good when I first had it, but I liked it how I ended up setting it up in the end. So this feature for the imager is really great, and it's got this really cool feature which is called Stereoize. And Stereoize just is really fantastic if you want to get a wide track and the track is already really good in phase. And the key, I guess, to this whole thing with the stereo imager is to have your track in phase at the start, not to have phase issues that you're trying to fix in the mastering process. There might be some times where you do get that, but for the most part, you don't want to have like things completely out of phase, especially with your kick and your bass already out of phase in a track. So you'd want to fix that in the mix to get that sorted. So anyway, so as you can see, I'm just going to turn off all these plugins, and that's that little feature there. If you don't know what that is, that's a button just here that you can turn all your plugins on and off. It's really cool, quite handy. But anyway, let's just go back to the mastered version, and I'll quickly play the difference between the two again so you can hear it if you want. And if you've got any thoughts there, just let me know in the comments, and I can try and help you out with your track like understanding what to do or whatever. This final thing here, just so you know, is a dithering feature that's normally on a Waves L2 or L3 or whatever it is, if they have that's dithering on the side. But this is a little bit more, I guess, technical. So it's got DC offset, which helps you give yourself a little bit more headroom, correcting the offset, any offset of DC there. And this has also got a noise shaping feature and some dithering and 16-bit bit depth. So I've put this peak limiter on so it stops the peaks from going over the top, and I've pretty much used that as a function there. So anyway, let's finish this off, and I hope you guys enjoyed this quick tutorial on how I master a track. And if there's, like I said, any comments, remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It does really help me out, and I'll just keep doing more of these videos because you guys show me so much love. So otherwise, peace.
CKA, man, at the moment I'm going in straight like I miss those curves. And I'm just this guy, Mr. Evangelist, whose purpose is serving God as a gift, no envelope.